Hello, today we're taking a look at the Hobbymate all-in-one F3 flight controller with built-in 40-channel video transmitter. So let's take a look around the board. Here at the top we have the ESC outputs, battery input, and ground. Here is the camera connection with video in, audio in, 5 volts and ground. The receiver connection with ground, 5 volts, 3.3 volts, and your connection for your S-Bus, PPM, and DSMX receivers. You have your buzzer input, your MMCX connector for your antenna lead, and it comes with the antenna lead. It is SMA. You have your LED connections over here, and you have your channel, band, and power selector for your VTX. Flipping the board over, you have the band and channel LED readout, micro USB connector. You have outputs around the board for your ESC connections if you decide not to use the one on the front of the board for the 4-in-1 type connection. You have a real boot button here, not one of those plastic film ones. Seems like they always fall apart. You have a 5-volt, 3-amp ESC. You got the F3 processor, and you have the Betaflight OSD chip, and this does run the Omnibus firmware. The board is spaced out. The board is 36 millimeters by 36 millimeters and has the 30.5 millimeter full spacing, so it is a full-size board. So recently I used this flight controller as part of a build. This is the Hobbymate X145 millimeter frame kit. This is a Hobbymate 4-in-1 20 amp ESC, a Runcam Micro Swift 2 CCD camera. So this board comes with the connector to connect up to the 4-in-1 style ESC. It also comes with the lead to be able to connect up to the camera connection, up to your camera. And so I just soldered those onto the camera wires. For the receiver connection here, it comes with the wire to be able to connect up to that. And I just have that lead soldered on to a little Hobbymate FR Sky receiver. So I'll go ahead and put the flight controller back in the frame and show you what it looks like. Alright, so I've got the flight controller mounted back in the frame now. So you can see the receiver wire here on the side is just running up to my receiver that's mounted to the top plate. The wires for the camera on the front of the board, so conveniently located close to the camera. On this side, you can see that I've got the wires running to the 4-in-1 ESC coming in the side here, and they come off the front of the board. Here you can see the channel and band indicator. So how this works is just single press changes the channel, double press changes the band, and then triple press changes the power output. So I was on 25 milliwatts, now it's flashing, that's 200. Again, that's 500 milliwatts with a solid little dot in the lower right hand corner. And then do it again, I'm back to 200 milliwatts. And if you hold it down for greater than 10 seconds, turns it off. So I like this board, I like the way it's laid out. Out of the back of the board, you have the MMCX antenna lead connector, and it's very easy. The wire is pliable enough to circle it around in a tight space if necessary. So all in all, this board makes for a very clean build. So now let's go over to the computer and I'll show you how I set it up in Betaflight and BLHeli suite.
So here we are in Betaflight. I've got my flight controller hooked up to the USB port. So if you haven't already, install the drivers for Betaflight and your board. Betaflight has them here on the welcome page, links to them. So once you get that done, you'll see a COM port being listed up here for which port your flight controller is connected to your computer. You hit connect. You know it's good. If it goes onto this screen, you can wiggle your quadcopter. You see it moving on the screen. So the very first thing I like to do when I first set up a board is go to the CLI and get the stock settings, get a backup of the stock settings. So if you type dump into the command line at the bottom, you can right click and copy all of this and paste this into Notepad and save it on your computer as the stock setup as a backup. So if you mess something up, you can always come back and um, and go back in here and paste this all back in. It's just one big paste. If I did it right here, I just right click what I just copied and paste that all back in. It's all here. If I scroll up at the bottom here, you can see it's all there. I'm not going to go ahead and save that, but you would have to hit save when you get done with that, and it would apply all those settings. So I'm going to go back over here and go back to setup. Once you get out of the CLI, it'll reboot, and then you hit connect again, and then we'll go through the various tabs. So on the first tab, really the only thing on here is, well, you can back up it here via Betaflight as well, um, but you can calibrate the accelerometer. I don't need to do that right now. So move on to ports. I have my receiver hooked up to UART3. It's a serial receiver. It's S-Bus. And so that's hooked up on this board on UART3. Moving on to configuration, I have the Hobbymate 4-in-1 ESC board. It's compatible up to D-Shot 600, so I have that selected. I have motor stop selected. I like to have that. I don't like to spin motors when armed. I'll take care of that through air mode. And I also liked to disarm the motors independent of throttle value when I disarm it. So I have that checked. Other than that, this board does feature an OSD, so that's checked. Since the OSD has VBAP monitoring, this is really optional because they'll be seeing that on the OSD. When you get done with any changes here, you would hit save and reboot. Oh, first of all, I should note that this is where you change the receiver. You know, as I mentioned, I have a S-Bus receiver, which is very common now, and this is what most people will use. And so I have that selected, and then what type of S-Bus. Um, I have a FR Sky S-Bus. Um, if you had Spectrum, you would select either one of these. So you have the standard options. So if you change anything, you hit save and reboot. Moving on to failsafe, these are defaults. It's set up to drop after a short period of time with no signal. That's the way I like to have them set up. On to PNID tuning. I have not changed this. These are stock settings. This is what I flew on in the maiden video. They fly pretty good. I still need to do some tuning probably on this. I'll be doing that here in the near term. On the receiver, you have to have a battery plugged in and your transmitter turned on. Pretty much the things to do here is the first thing you'll do is checking, make sure that all your channels are coming through. When you move like your ailerons or your roll stick, you want to make sure that it's moving the correct direction and it's in the right right ones mapped to it here. If it's not moving the correct direction, you need to reverse that on your radio. If it's not moving, let's say if I move the aileron and the elevator bar here was moving, you would need to switch those two here on the channel map. I've never had to switch rudder. I've only ended up having to switch the first three here. So you just need to reorder these and hit save each time so that you get them mapped correctly. The other thing you want to do here is to change your servo throw so that you get it all the way from approximately 1,000 up to about 2,000, and you want them centered. You can change your sub trim in your radio to change it so that you have approximately 1,500 as centered. So I got all that set up. You can also see here that we got the aux channels on my radio. So there's aux 1. I'll use that to arm the quad. Aux 2 here, 3-position switch for flight mode, and aux 3 here, which I'm not using, but you could use that for beeper or something. So if you've made any changes, hit save. So on the modes, I have, like I mentioned a second ago, I have the aux 1 hooked up to my arm, so you can see when I flip that, it does arm the quad. Then my aux 2 here is set up for my flight modes. In one position, it's angle, flip it to a middle position. It is now horizon. You flip it to the last position. It was really acro mode, and I'm also activating air mode, which essentially spins the props independent of throttle position, or really at near zero throttle position. So it's very handy for acrobatics. So um, that's pretty much it. If you ended up having a beeper, you could add an additional channel here that would maybe be like my aux 3 or something like that, but you could add that if you wanted to. I don't have a beeper set up on this one yet. So that's essentially it as far as the setup. Now what we need to do is make sure, once we have all that set up, we make sure that our motors are turning the correct direction. So what you want to do here is not have props on. And then what we're going to do is make sure that all our motors are spinning in the correct direction, and because we're using a 4-in-1 ESC on this build, make sure that the right motors, when I turn on motor 1 here, make sure that actually motor 1 on the quadcopter is actually spinning. And it's likely not, because we know that this is where we're going to have to do some remapping. So props are off. So let's go ahead and switch this little box here. All right, so let's go over here and we'll spin up motor number 1. All right, so in Betaflight motor number 1, actually on my quadcopter, motor number 4 is spinning. So I'm gonna have to remap these. So I'll go ahead and write that down. So in Betaflight 1 is equaling on the quad 4. So now I'll spin number 2. Okay, 2 is correct. I'll spin number 3. Okay, in Betaflight, motor number 3 is actually spinning motor number 1, and spin the last one here. And so motor number 4 is actually spinning motor number 3 in the quad. So I got all those written down, and so I'll show you how to remap those. And as far as direction goes, um, number 2, 3, and 4 all need to be reversed. We'll do that in BLHeli Suite. But let's take care of the motor mapping first. Go ahead and flip this back off here, and we'll go over to the CLI. All right, so what we need to do here is type resource here in the bottom. So this is how the motors are presently mapped. Motor number 1 is mapped to B08, 2 is mapped to B09, 3 is mapped to A03, and 4 is mapped to A02. So we're going to need to reorder these based on what we wrote down. We don't have to mess with number 2, it was fine, but we're just going to have to assign the numbers, the right mapping for each motor based on what we just saw. So what I usually do is I'll go ahead and copy this, and I'll paste this into a notepad. And then within notepad, I'll kind of write down what I need to change, and then I'll make up the new motor mapping in notepad. So I've already done that. So this is the original right here. This matches what we have right here on the screen. We see that 1's B08, down through here, we see they're all the same. So this is the original. So then I write down what we just saw. So we saw that number 1 in Betaflight was number 4 on the quad, 2 was 2, 3 in Betaflight was 1 on the quad, and 4 in Betaflight was 3 on the quad. So we'll need to reorder this so that it works out properly. So we're going to, for number 4, we are going to we're going to copy in this position right here, whatever was for number 1. So 4 used to be A02, but we saw here that 4 needs to be assigned to what is in 1. So we'll grab what's 1 up here and we'll copy in the 4 position. And we'll do that for 1, 3, and 4 here. So I've already done that. So once you get done with the reordering, all you have to do is copy this and bring it back into Betaflight, into the CLI, paste it down here, It's all there. If you scroll up here on the right, you can see all of them here. And then you hit enter and it remaps it. And we'll confirm that it did it by hitting resource again. Gotta spell it right. And we'll go back and compare what we have new here to what we had inside Notepad. So now we see it took. So we see number 1 is A03, 2 is B09, 3 is A02, and 4 is B08. So that's all right, but it's not going to do any good at all unless we hit type save down here at the bottom. And now it's saved. So now we can connect again. Go to CLI, just confirm one more time, type resource, and confirm that everything's saved. It did. Motor 1's A03, B09, A02, B08. So, yep, that all matches. So we're good. So now we can go back to the Motors tab, connect again. Back to the Motors tab. Still no props. We can spin the motors and make sure they're spinning in the right position. There we go. 1 is in the correct position. 2 is in the correct position. 3 is in the correct position. And 4 is in the correct position. But we still got to reverse them. So I still need to reverse 2, 3, and 4 because they're not spinning in the correct direction. So we're done here in Betaflight. So now we can disconnect out of here and we can go over to BLHeli Suite. So now here in BLHeli Suite, very similar connecting just like Betaflight. You would hit read setup here. And you can see here, so we got to change 2, the direction, motor 2, 3, and 4, and then we hit right setup. We can hit read again to make sure that it took, and it did. So that's it. So now we can go back over to Clean Flight, test the motors one last time, and make sure they're spinning the correct direction. All right, back to Betaflight, hit connect, go back to the motors tab, still no props. Test the direction of each motor, so we're looking at this little map up here, make sure they're spinning correct. Yep, 1's spinning correct. 2's good. 3's good. 4's good. All right, now, so let's set up our OSD. Now to the OSD tab. So here you have the option of turning on different OSD elements. And you essentially have a diagram here on the screen of what the layout looks like. And also showing my FPV feed. Right now too, I got a little cap over the camera so it shows up black. But you can turn on or off various elements. So I'm not a big fan of the artificial horizon, so I typically turn those off. So I'll turn off these sidebars. I do not need on time, but I do like to have fly time, and do have craft name on there. So that's the most of it. The other thing you can do here is if what you see on your FPV screen may not be exactly, or what you see on the main screen here may not be exactly what you see on your FPV screen. So you can move them around. So if this voltage readout for the battery is too low or too high, or you want to move it somewhere else, you can just click it and scooch it over there, and it instantly changes. So perhaps I'll leave it over there in that upper right-hand corner. But once you change everything the way you want it and get it laid out on the screen correctly, then you just hit save. And it's really that simple. But the other thing I want to show you that's really handy with the OSD is to be able to change your tuning without having to go into Betaflight to do it. So the way you do that is change your PIDs. So you can get into a lot of the Betaflight settings by entering the configuration menu through your OSD. So what you do is you take your throttle stick and you move it to mid position, halfway up. This is for mode 2, so your throttle stick's on your left. And then you take, while it's in that position, you hold it all the way to the left, and then you take your pitch or your elevator, your right stick, and move it all the way up. And then you get into the menu system. And using the right stick, you can move through the various settings. So there's lots of settings here, but what I'm going to do is move into profile, and you go to the right here, and then you go down to P&ID, and here you have all your P&IDs. So let's say I want to change the D term on my roll um, to 35 to match the P term or the D term on my pitch. So I just go up and down until I select roll. This is on my right stick, roll the D term, and then I go to the right and I can save and increase it or decrease it. Right increases, left decreases. So you can go and change it, and then you can, once you get where you want to, where you want it, you can hit back, go to the right, go down to the bottom, back again, and save and reboot. So if you just hit exit, then it would not have saved. So now here we are. All those settings should have been changed. Let's go back here and check. And so left stick halfway up, all the way to the left, right stick real quick to the top position, and go back into P&IDs. And here we are. See, it's saved. It was 30, now it's 35. Perfect. So we can go back, and next time we can exit without saving. So OSDs are really cool, and they're particularly cool if you can do your tuning without having going back to Betaflight each time and making the changes. So you can do all that at the field. Um, so with that, that wraps up the Betaflight configuration. I hope you enjoyed this video, and happy flying.